Are there any members that would like to declare an interest in relation to any items on the agenda this evening? Councillor Mockpool.
Evening. I'd like to declare an pecuniary interest in item 4B, which is the T&T taxi company.
Thank you.
So for the minutes, you'll be leaving the meeting and taking no part
Yes.
in the debate or the voting?
Yes, I will
Thank
be
you.
leaving the meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Bretton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Item number 1 is part of my ward.
Thank you. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3A as I represent there with HCC, and 4C as I represent War Boys with in my county position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3. Development, management, other applications. 3A is Ramsey. However, there has been a change in opinion from Cambridgeshire County Council, the local highways, and they are now raising an objection. So I propose we don't determine it tonight. So do I have someone to second? Thank you, Councillor Corney.
So, in the absence of any dissent, then that item will not be determined tonight. Okay, thank you.
Moving on to item 4A, which is St Neots, and I will invite Planning Officer Maria Rosamond to present this for us.
This application is for the change of use from a 6-bedroom house in multiple occupation, use class C4, to a 7-bedroom house in multiple occupation, use class C generis. This application has been brought to Planning Committee as the Planning Officer's recommendation of approval is contrary to St Neots Town Council's recommendation of refusal. Please note that the report originally included a map with its insert showing the wrong area. This has been corrected via a late rep. Please also note that in section 8 of the report, I recommend that it's a 10-person maximum condition, which should read 8-person maximum condition. The application site includes an existing residential property located in a mainly residential area on Hardwick Road within the built-up area of Amesbury, St Neots. The surrounding area is predominantly residential with a small parade of shops opposite the site. The site lies approximately 22 metres east of the St Neots Conservation Area. There are no listed buildings within close proximity of the site, and the site is in flood zone 1. The site comprises an end-of-terrace 2-storey dwelling with a 2-storey side extension and porch approved in 2016. The site's front garden is hard-standing, currently used as a drive for up to 5 vehicles, with the land to the rear a residential garden. The conversion of the dwelling into a house of multiple occupation was implemented under permitted development rights in 2020. A house of multiple occupation licence was granted by Huntingdonshire District Council in September 2021. This application seeks full planning permission for a change of use from a 6-bedroom house in multiple occupation to a 7-bedroom house in multiple occupation. This would change the use class of the site from C4, a shared dwelling for up to 6 people, to sui generis, a shared dwelling for over 6 people. No changes would be made to the dwelling in terms of scale, footprint or design. This is the proposed site plan, which shows the front parking area, rear garden, cycle storage and bin storage. This slide shows the existing arrangement of the 6-bedroom dwelling, with the storage room on the ground floor on the plan to the left, proposed to be converted into a bedroom to create a 7-bedroom dwelling. Here are the proposed plans showing the storeroom on the ground floor, now labelled as Room 2. The existing storeroom and proposed bedroom would remain 9.2 square metres in area, with a window fronting the main elevation onto Hardwick Road. Here is an interior photo of the existing storeroom looking toward the window. Here is another looking the other way. Both of these photos were taken at the doorway off the ground floor hall. Here is a front view of the site showing the 2016 extension and existing parking arrangements. Here is a view to the south. I'm standing here on the opposite side of the road. Here is a view to the north from the front of the site. Please note that this bus stop is no longer in use. This is a view east toward the this is a view east toward the row of shops opposite the site. The Parish Council have objected to the proposal on the basis of noise and disturbance resulting from use, adequacy of parking, loading, turning, and layout and density of the building. While these comments are noted, it is also the case that the proposal benefits from the fallback position of being a 6-person house in multiple occupation, which requires no planning permission. It is considered that the proposal, by virtue of only one additional person residing at the dwelling, would introduce only a minor intensification of the site than the existing arrangements. Cambridgeshire County Highways and HDC's Environmental Health and Licensing team have assessed the proposal and raised no objections. It should be made clear to the Planning Committee that we are considering the land use only and not the adequacy or management of the HMO, which is regulated and controlled by the HDC licensing team. The Planning Committee are encouraged to approve the proposal in line with the Officer's recommendation of approval, subject to conditions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers on this particular application. The first speaker is Councillor Daniel Laycock. Thank you. You will have 3 minutes to address the committee, and once you start, then the timer will be set. And when the red light comes on, that's when you need to stop talking. Thank you. Press the middle button.
There we go. That's better. Thank you. Good evening, committee. So I'm speaking on behalf of St Neots Town Council. As you are probably aware, that as a planning committee, we have obviously objected to this application. I think first of all, I kind of want to explain why we've objected to this. After deliberation from our committee, we felt that the HMO would be an overdevelopment on the property. There'd also be issues around parking. So, for example, in section 7.33 of the officer's report, which outlined the requirements of St Neots Town neighbourhood plan, all development must provide a delegate space for vehicle parking to meet the expected needs of residents and visitors. And obviously, with this, they will only have 1 extra resident, but 0 extra vehicle parking. In another essence as well, we felt that not only just because of that there would be an overlay of the outlay of the property would be an overdevelopment, but we also kind of felt that not only because the increase in cars that will obviously be used within the area, but also a noise and disturbance resulting from the use of vehicles and also within the property itself. There was comment actually on the property itself in relation to their objections as well, which was duly noted by the Town Council Planning Committee, and for that reason we objected to the application.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from councillors for this particular speaker? No, there are no questions, so thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Greening. Welcome, and again you have 3 minutes in which to speak to the committee. And if you press the middle button. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone this evening. I'm aware of the concerns that have been raised regarding our proposed development and would like to reassure them that this proposal would not cause any issues related to the amenities currently enjoyed by the residents of Hardwick Road. We are members of the National Residential Landlords Association and also members of Platinum Property Partners, which is an organisation that is committed to providing high quality, affordable accommodation provision. This proposal is for a high quality shared house which would not be tenanted by students, but rather those wishing to live and work in the area but that could not otherwise afford to do so. We take pride in being hands-on landlords. We directly manage 3 other HMOs in the area, and we conduct weekly site visits. We employ cleaners and gardeners. The Council's planning team has made a recommendation for approval, reflecting the positive impact of this proposal. It is also worth noting that there have been only 2 objections, and the HMO licensing team have approved the proposal changes to this property. Planning permission is not required for change of use to an HMO with up to 6 people under permitted development rights, and it is not subject to planning policy or parking guidance, which is noted as a material fallback position by the planning case officer. The officer agrees that no loss of C3 dwelling would result in the proposed development, as it is already an HMO, and the conversion of a storeroom to a bedroom with no external changes or increasing footprint on layout and density grounds would not form a defendable reason for refusal in this case. The current application for use as a large HMO has been submitted in order to address the local housing shortages by using existing housing stock to address the critical affordability issues. HMOs, when done properly, play an essential role in providing affordable housing choice to people who contribute to the local economy and community. Of my nearby HMOs, there are several tenants who are key workers, including nurses and teachers. The key concern appears to be parking. There are no specific parking policy standards to adhere to. However, the existing front drive currently consists of accommodating 5 off-road parking spaces. The Council's approval recommendation includes it is considered that 1 additional bedroom would not likely increase the number of vehicle movements on a day-to-day basis to be significantly greater than the existing C4 use, and as such, it would not result in additional noise or disturbance from vehicle movements so substantial that it would warrant a refusal of the proposal on noise and disturbance impacts. Highways have also raised no objections relating to the public highway impacts and stating that the additional vehicle would not exacerbate the existing situation significantly. It is therefore not clear how this application could be justifiably refused on parking grounds. I hope I've answered anyone's concerns or questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greening. Are there any questions of clarification for this particular speaker? There are no questions, so thank you very much, Mr. Greening. So we will move on to see if there are any questions that councillors have for the planning officer. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you. Can I just double check in section 8, the conditions that you've recommended? The proposal shall only be used as a house of an HMO by no more than, and then there's a number of residents and shall be retained as such thereafter. What is the number that you're recommending for this condition?
We can, I did put in the report that it should be 8 people, but we can discuss this in this arena and come to a conclusion on how many people we'd like to limit in this particular HMO. And I've recommended 8. Yes, so I did say at the beginning of my presentation it was an error. Just wanted to clarify it was 8 people. Thanks.
Are there any other questions of clarification? There are no more questions of clarification, so we'll move on to the debate on this particular application. Are there any councillors that would like to start the debate? Councillor Corney.
Somebody's got to. Do you know, don't really have an issue with this. I appreciate fully the things that have been highlighted by the town council, but I think in reality you could have a family with more members living in the house that we wouldn't know anything about it, and you know they'd just be living their lives. So I think it's the fact that the officers have done the work on this, and it's I can't find anything material to sort of go against it. So I think I'll happily propose it if it helps.
Thank you, I'll keep that in mind. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. I think we are required and would very much wish to give due regard to the neighbourhood plan that was referenced by the speaker on behalf of the town council. But as I think 734 of the report underlines, the highways grounds need to be more significant than is raised here about the difference with one extra car for us to consider being able to defensibly refuse permission here. So this strikes me as a relatively straightforward one, and I'm happy to second Councillor Corney's proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. I was actually going to propose that because I mean, looking through this, yes, there's always a parking issue with anybody that's got anything, but actually I can't see any additional problems this would cause. And actually we do try to promote, of course, that some premises don't have parking at all. So it's that difficult balance. We don't have a policy about parking specifically for those purposes. And I think it is a good use of existing housing. And I, again, would have seconded it, but it's done before, so I'm happy with the actual proposal that's there.
Okay, so we have a proposal from Councillor Corney and we've been seconded by Councillor Wakeford to propose to approve in line with the recommendations. All those for?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
All those against?
1, 2.
Any abstentions?
So that's approved, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to item 4B, and that is St Ives. And I invite the planning officer, Lewis Collins, to make a presentation on this particular application.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Okay. This application proposes a change of use to a ground floor retail unit at 14 Crown Street, St Ives, to a taxi business. A 3-year temporary permission for this change of use expired in 2021. The previous permission was granted on a temporary basis to allow the council to assess the impacts of the change of use in terms of parking, operating hours, and compatibility with surrounding businesses. The site is located in the primary shopping frontage of St Ives Town Centre. The application is referred to the committee as the application does not accord with local plan policy LP21, which states that non-main town centre uses will not be supported at ground floor level within a primary shopping frontage. The officer recommendation of approval would therefore be a departure from the development plan. As set out in the officer report, it is considered that the taxi business complements the surrounding businesses. The loss of this small retail unit would be away from the greatest concentration of retail in the town centre, and the site is located within an area where the largest concentration of nighttime economy activity takes place. On balance, it is considered that what the taxi business provides to the town's nighttime economy outweighs the loss of a small retail unit in this location in this instance. An objection has been submitted by the Town Council regarding parking issues in Crown Street and that taxis unlawfully enter the pedestrian zone and park outside the premises. The applicant has submitted a scheme of operations setting out how the business will be operating going forward, including the use of personal digital assistant devices, and that the business has recently moved into a new head office in Huntingdon, meaning there is no need for taxis to wait in the town centre or enter the pedestrian zone on Crown Street. The Cambridgeshire Constabulary have been consulted throughout the application and raised no objection, although are aware of the existing issues raised by the Town Council. Overall, it is not considered that there are any significant issues regarding loss of retail space, traffic generation, car parking or amenity, which warrant refusal of the application. The recommendation is therefore to approve the application subject to the conditions at Section 8 of the Officer Report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I believe we have a speaker for this particular application, Councillor Craig Smith. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the committee.
Good evening. Is this on? Oh, perfect. Sorry, just get the paperwork. Perfect. Good evening. My name is Councillor Craig Smith and I'm representing St Ives Town Council as the Vice Chair of the Planning Committee. The Town Council's recommendation for this application is refusal. There are already considerable parking issues in Crown Street and clarification is sought on the arrangements for parking, picking up passengers, etc. Currently, cars associated with the business park illegally outside the office, partly on the road and partly on the footpath, which obstructs both footpath and the road. Because Crown Street is so narrow, it means that any vehicles wishing to travel along there have to mount the pavement on the other side of the road to get past. This poses a danger to pedestrians and potentially restricts access to emergency vehicles. Pavements are damaged and access for pedestrians and wheelchair users are severely restricted. In 2018, we asked for assurances that taxis must not block Crown Street or the pavement outside the office. This has not been implemented. We feel that this issue needs to be addressed before change of use is granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification from councillors for this particular speaker? No, there are no questions. Thank you very much. If there are any, we will move on to see if there are any questions of clarification for our planning officer. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been referred to as TNT taxis all the way through, and yet I noticed the application says TNT private hire. As they're two very different uses, it would create different types of activities. Can we have clarification of which one it actually is, please?
I'm not aware that there's two separate entities. So we've been assessing the application based on TNT private hire.
Yeah, the reason I ask is there's a difference in use under licensing. Under licensing private hire, they dispatch vehicles elsewhere to pick up. As a taxi service, you can hail them or they can park from there. So just want to get that bit right. I mean, it doesn't make a huge difference. I just want to make sure we get it right. So some clarity on it would be fine. If it's private hire, which is what I suspect it is, then I'm not upset with that. I just don't think it's a taxi service.
Yeah, so essentially what we're assessing here is the use of the building itself as a taxi business.
That's the point I've got. It's not a taxi business. You can't assess it as a taxi business if it's a private hire one. I don't mind if it's a private hire and we assess it in that way. I'm just saying we need to do it the right way because it's not a taxi business. I understand the planning issues here. But as I say, if it's a private hire business, it needs to be dealt with as a private hire business, because there is a difference in the use and the activities that are created from that.
Thank you, Councillor Dew. Just to build on what Lewis has alluded to there, that the focus of this application is about the building itself, recognising the point you're making being about the activities associated with the use of that building. However, recognising that both uses have an impact on the highway, the application has been assessed by Cambridgeshire County Council and the constabulary, recognising that we won't be able to control activities in the public highway in any event. So with that in mind,
microphone. I'm still doing that. Yeah, it just helps, with the understanding of the debate going forward, because, as I say, I understand perfectly what you're saying about it's about the use of the building, but I think as the objections that are coming in are about the activities that are created around it, they should be two very different types of activities, because one dispatches out, others you can call in and hail them. So, but anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. 7.25 says the site's in flood zone 2 and it's a change of use, so not subject to the sequential test, but does say that it needs a site-specific flood risk assessment. I'm not sure of the reason for that and why that's not in the conditions at item 8.
Yep, so the applicant submitted a site-specific flood risk assessment, relatively small-scale assessment given the change of use, no actual changes to the building. One of the recommended conditions is to retain the existing floor level, which was the outcome of that flood risk assessment. No other mitigation measures were considered necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
In section 5.5 of your report, you speak to meetings with the constabulary and the need for a scheme of operations. What was the outcome of that conversation and has that been received?
Yes, so the applicant submitted the scheme of operations which set out how they are going to operate going forward. As I mentioned in the report and the presentation, that's mainly around personal digital assistance. They've got their devices where they'll get a fare come in, and so they necessarily won't have to wait around the town centre where the business unit is. They can pick it up from anywhere. So in between, they could go home or they could be anywhere. And also that they've got their new headquarters in Huntingdon, which is understands in a business park with 50 parking spaces. So as part of this application, it's been demonstrated that they don't have to access the town centre. They don't have to go on Crown Street. They can operate away from the business of the town centre and come in when necessary.
Do we have any more questions? Councillor Gawson.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the parking, can it be conditioned? I know it's something that the police have said, and it's also a licensing thing, but can it be conditioned about parking outside? Because certainly when having a look at the site, there was evidence of taxis being parked outside.
So I don't think it would be enforceable to condition parking because, as you say, it's ultimately down to the constabulary to manage that. A key thing as part of this application was consulting with the constabulary. They looked at the scheme of operations that was submitted and they're happy. Although they did raise concerns originally, they're happy on the basis of what's been submitted that there'll be no significant issues. But no, to answer your question, I don't think it would pass the tests of being enforceable to condition parking.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the police are recommending that they formulate some sort of pick-up and drop-off point, and it says that you've been under consultation, but do we need to know that? Can we be told what the arrangements are? Because all it says is comments have been acceptable by the police.
Yep, so there was a it was 3 consultations with the constabulary throughout the application. I think what you've mentioned there was one of the first comments that came back about a drop-off pickup situation. So I think following that was when we got to the scheme of operations document that came to us. We assessed it in consultation with the constabulary. That's about the personal devices that have your fares and also the change of the headquarters to Huntingdon. So they're the 2 main things that, for the officer opinion, that meant that those pickup points and issues around the town centre weren't necessarily as significant.
So the pickup points have been agreed?
No, that's kind of was dropped after the initial consultation with the constabulary. Their final position is that they reviewed the scheme of operations and they've got no objections.
Thank you. It's just we have the parish council here, and I mean, I'd like them to have an answer, a reason why you've come to this decision. You know, that they're happy, that they're satisfied. I know probably they're not because they're objecting still, but as some form of consolation that something's been arranged that will pacify the parish council, that there won't be the problem of parking on the pavement outside the shop.
Yeah, I think obviously within the planning process we can only do a certain amount. So I think what they've demonstrated as part of this application is that they can operate in a way that won't create those issues. So that's what's led me to a recommendation of approval. I think then it's falls to the constabulary to overcome these issues of unlawful parking as and when. But for some context, as far as I'm aware, the constabulary have had no direct complaints about the taxi business when they're operating under the temporary permission, and highways raised no specific issues. We've also had no records for the district council of any issues. So as much as it's recognised as a bit of a problem, it's not been raised as a major problem.
Councillor Davenport-Ray.
When forming your recommendation, how much weight did you place with the local plan and the policy of taxi business not being a main town centre use? How did you weigh those factors up?
I think the key thing for that was consultation with our economic development team. Obviously have a keen interest in the vitality and viability of the town centre. So that their recommendation was that what the taxi business provides to the nighttime economy would outweigh the loss of this small unit in this area, in this instance. So that was the balancing assessment.
Are there any other questions for clarification for our planning officer? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to the debate. Councillor Dew.
Yeah, thank you very much. If we're starting the debate, despite the fact I was a bit edgy with Lewis, I actually think his recommendations are right on this. We have to look at when the plan was originally drawn up and what our aspirations were and how the world has changed since. And I seem to recall at that time, you know, we were trying to keep every single unit we could in town. And whereas I think we accept nowadays that the nighttime and leisure economy is becoming the major part of what happens there, and I think being able to get people in and out in a sustainable way is actually really useful. Because what I don't want to see is loads of people just parking their cars there, which is a different problem. So I think having that business there has been positive. You know, it does mean if you're in town, you can actually, you know, you can't hail a taxi because they're a private hire firm. But getting back to that, but you can go in there and order one, and they'll get you in. One of the things I think you have to remember with that piece of road is if you have a look at it, there's lots of talk here, and I agree with the town council about there has been parking outside in the past. But I think if you look at the 2 takeaways either side in an evening with their delivery services, they probably have more traffic parked there in any one evening than the taxi service does. So I think there's an issue about enforcement, and that's back to the police. It's fine to say, you know, what can we do? And the answer is, you know, we'd like to do something, but actually the enforcement issues are already there. They're not allowed to be there. The police should be moving them on, but that's something we need to do outside. I think it's made a positive contribution to the the economy of the town. And whilst I'd love to see the whole town full of nice little boutique shops like it was when I was young, it's not the world we live in now. So I think I'd sooner see it being used for a business that supports the local economy, rather than number one see, I'm nothing against charity shops, but another charity shop, or worse than that, an empty unit. I think a unit that's into use that contributes to supporting other businesses, we should be supporting. So when you're ready to take a recommendation for approval, I'll be prepared to do it, unless you would like to take it now, of course, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that was a recommendation. Anyway, a lot of this issue bears down to parking, which actually isn't part of the planning application, of course, because it's the unit change of use that we're looking at. But it is a big problem down there, and it isn't just the tax services, it's other areas. And one would hope that in the future that maybe the utilising of this shopping frontage as would be better suited to being back to a shopping frontage, especially with the potential regeneration down the future with master plans, etc. And going back to the policing issue, yes, it is a police matter, but we also know that is at the bottom of their list most of the time. So there are a number of issues down there. Potentially one of them could be the taxi service as well. And that's where I agree with the town council, their concerns. But of course, their concerns don't necessarily relate directly to the planning of it. Civil parking enforcement may well help to improve, but obviously that's still a little way off, but we know it's rolling through, and hopefully that will start to support towns all over, as well as some of the villages. I struggle to find any particular planning reasons, apart from I think it is a shame that we're losing a primary shopping frontage in that particular location. But if no one else is coming forward to utilise it, then it's always a difficult one. And from a growth perspective, we do need it. I'm still minded to be on the balance on this one, which is not like me. I don't normally sit on the fence, but I'm sure I could be persuaded one way or another as the debate goes on. So I'm not going to second it just yet. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Davenport-Ray.
I understand the ideas of this being beneficial to the nighttime economy of St. Ives, but I struggle to understand the rationale of having a taxi business in a location where you cannot get a taxi. And so if this were placed elsewhere, I think I would be more in favor of it. But given that their business model is not to have people come to the site, not to bring their taxis to the site, and the fact that they have a new building elsewhere makes me wonder about the viability of a permanent permission of having a taxi business in that space.
Councillor Niche.
It's just also it's a planning application, which is difficult because we have to go on what we've got in front of us. And I understand where you're coming from, but I think we have to be mindful that this is the application that's in front of us. We might well choose and probably think it might be a better location, but this is an application, so I think we have to be mindful of that as well.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, well, I'm not a resident of St Neots, but I do bow to the St Ives, but I do bow to the knowledge of Councillor Dewey. He's obviously the man on the street and on the ground, and I'd be happy to second his motion. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, I think I'm entitled. I would agree. I think this does support other businesses within that area. I know it's not a boutique or dress shop or whatever, but it does. And I agree also about the food outlets that were there and how much traffic that used to stay parking, waiting for food to go in. So I'm mindful of approving this. Thank you.
Councillor Dew, are you proposing?
I'm quite happy to, Chair. And then I think Councillor Butler seconded me, so.
Thank you. So we'll take a vote on this proposal to approve with the recommendations. All those that agree, put your hand up.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's unanimous, so that's approved, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Dew. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 4C, which is a planning application in Warboys, and our planning officer, Tom Gabriel, is coming to present this for us.
Thank you, Chair. This is a Grade 2 listed building, partially in the Warboys Conservation Area. The rear half of the site is not within the conservation area. The site is within flood zone 1. The proposal is for the conversion of the main building to 5 flats with the reinstatement or retention of the shop there. The former bakehouse in the middle the former, that is the, where my cursor is the main building, 66 itself. That is the former bakehouse. That currently is Derek's building, but they are proposing to repair, repoint and rebuild it where necessary and convert it to a 1-bed dwelling. The application is also for a pair of semi-detached dwellings here at the rear where my cursor is, 3-bed pair of semis at the back there with garden areas. The application is also proposing parking, two spaces for each of the 2 new units and 4 spaces for the remainder of the site, 8 spaces in total. The application differs from the previous application, which was, I think, considered in January of this year. The semi-detached dwellings are moved forward by 500 millimetres. There was a reduction in the number of bike store and stands on the site and their resiting. There is additional planting proposed in this application, and there is an increase in height of the rear fence of 500 mil, and the boundary of the garden for the bakehouse is being squared off. The history of the sites, an application of last year, which I think was determined in January of this year, with the same description as the current application, was refused as it would fail to respect the setting of the listed building and would be to the detriment of the character of the area, and the public benefit of the application would not outweigh the harm that would be caused. An application for the listed building consent of the same description was not determined at that time. An application back in 1995 for the change of the shop and the flat, and for the change of use of the site to retention of the shop, the flat, and 4-bed sits was granted permission, but there was no listed building consent application for that use at that point. Councillor, 2 comments on this application. Parish Council recommend approval as it would bring this building back into beneficial use. The county highways are okay subject to conditions. Environmental health is okay with the application subject to conditions. Representations received on the application: there's not enough parking, would represent overdevelopment of the site, result in loss of privacy and overshadowing, visual intrusion, and would result in harm to the listed building and the conservation area. The principle of the development is okay as the site is within the built-up area. Highways, as I have said, are happy with the application. It is in a sustainable location. 8 spaces for the site, Highways consider as satisfactory. In terms of the appearance, the impact of the development on the character appearance of the conservation area, the new dwellings would be outside of the conservation area. As I say, the boundary of the conservation area is the purple line running through the middle of the site. The new dwellings would be outside of the conservation area, but would clearly impact upon the character and appearance of the conservation area. In terms of the listed building setting, again, the proposed dwellings would impact upon that setting. The dwellings would be 12.3 metres from the listed bakehouse in the middle there, and 21.8 metres from the main building, the main listed building on the site at the front. By virtue of its size, scale, bulk and massing, the proposal would have an adverse impact upon the setting of the listed buildings. In terms of residential amenity, the new dwellings and the flats arising from the conversions would be satisfactory in terms of their floor space, outlook and amenity. The new dwellings would also be satisfactory in terms of the amenity they would provide. With regards to ecology and biodiversity, the application was submitted with an ecology checklist, which suggested that the applicants thought there were no protected species on the site. However, the application was not submitted with a preliminary ecological appraisal. Now, given the nature of the bakehouse, I'll bring up some. How do I get the photos up? The bake.
Hang on, I'd like to share.
Thank you. The bakehouse there is the building in the middle. That is a photograph from the front of the site. I wasn't able to get on the site because it's fenced off. But there is the bakehouse building in the middle of the photograph there. Given the nature of the building, it is clearly would appear to offer habitat for bats or other protected species, possibly biennials. Now, given that no ecological survey was submitted with the application, we can't be sure that there are no bats there, or there is no possibility of the bats or having been in previously. It is therefore not possible to know whether bats have been present. National guidance states that if an ecological survey has not been undertaken to determine the potential for bats on a site or other protected species on a site, that an appropriate survey should be sought in advance of the determination of an application where such a species may be present. It is also not possible to condition such a survey in accordance with the legislation. The site is in flood zone 1, so the lowest flood zone risk, not an undue risk of flooding. The development would be still liable. Overall, the proposed development would be sustainable, economically, socially and environmentally. However, the proposed dwellings would have an adverse impact upon the setting of the Grade 2 listed building at 66 High Street and would fail to preserve or enhance the character appearance of the Warboys Conservation Area. As I have stated, it is not known whether bats or other protected species are present on the site, and is therefore not known whether the development would harm or affect such species. The proposed development is therefore contrary to policies LP 30, LP 34 of the local plan, paragraphs 66 and 72 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act of 1990, and protected species legislation, the Wildlife and Counties Act of 1981, and the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations of 2017. The public benefits arising from the scheme will not outweigh the harm that this development would cause, and accordingly, the application is recommended for refusal. I do have a couple of late representations, if I may. This was information received in the last week or so from the applicant, a letter dated the 25th of May, from the solicitor, in fact, acting for the applicant. The officer report concludes that the application represents sustainable development but recommends refusal for the application. It is not fair to the applicant to continue to refuse the application where this is the case, where there is case law that provides that bringing a listed building back into viable use represents sustainable development. The benefits of the application in providing housing, bringing the building back into viable use and restoring the bakehouse outweigh any harm that the development would cause. The council's failure to take enforcement action against the previous breaches of planning control in this listed building represent a failure to act in accordance with a corporate enforcement policy. And a letter dated the 11th of October from the solicitor The application does not propose the removal or destruction of the bakehouse. The development accords with the local plan policy and the national planning policy framework. The point is also made that a preliminary ecological appraisal has never been asked for in this application or the previous one on the site, and its absence was not a reason for refusal of the previous case. A last-minute refusal on these grounds is unjust. It's also stated that we invite a planning obligation or condition to secure the ecological well-being of the site and the surroundings. One last thing, if I may. We received earlier today a comment from Councillor Charlotte Lowe, who's unable to attend this evening but would like me to read out a short statement. As new District Councillor for Warboys Ward, and knowing a little about the site, I thought it prudent to talk to those involved with this application. Warboys Parish Council are keen for the site to be lived in again after decades of neglect, as well as offering flats in Warboys, thereby helping locals to get on the planning housing ladder. I have also spoken to the owner of 66 High Street and the Conservation Officer, and can see both sides of the requirements for this site, especially with its Grade 2 listing and the legislation that is in place to protect our heritage. I am supporting this application with recommendations to be put in place. Whilst the below are not all planning considerations, I believe it essential to provide the history of the site given its listing. And the 4 points are: the bakehouse should be kept in place, being renovated and used as a storage for the flats, such as for bikes and bins. There should be a communal garden rather than the 2 chalet bungalows in the back garden. There should be parking for residents, and the remaining shop fittings should be included within each of the flats, so the owners have the history of the place along with the prints of photographs of its original use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers on this particular planning application. First of all is the Parish Councillor, Councillor Jeff Willis. Welcome, and just to remind you that you have 3 minutes to address the committee, and the timer will start when you start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Parish Council strongly support this planning application and recommend its approval. The listed building of 66 High Street has been an eyesore for 30 years, surrounded by Harris fencing and sadly neglected, with the bakehouse completely covered in ivy. During this time, despite the efforts of the Parish Council, no enforcement action was taken against the owners, despite breaches of planning regulations. We now have a new owner prepared to invest and restore the property after 30 years of neglect. We're concerned by the inconsistent reasons for the officer's recommendation for refusal, stating that the proposal would fail to respect the setting of the listed buildings to the detriment of the character of the area. This was never raised as a reason for objection in the previous application. Also, we would point out that it is inconsistent with the planning application that was granted many years ago for the listed building which is attached, 64 High Street, which was converted into 6 flats with a car park at the rear, and for the remainder of the site, which is across the rear of 66 High Street, to be developed as a modern housing estate. But still, there is a refusal with regard to the rear of 66 High Street. Also, as already has been referred, the application, there's no reference in any previous applications to a requirement for a preliminary ecological report. Finally, we understand that the conservation team wished the original fittings to be restored to the shop. Members of the Parish Council visited the site to observe the state of the fittings. Despite being consistently given reassurance that they were in secure storage after removal from the site, they are in fact in very poor condition, with little of the fittings salvageable. If repaired as suggested, the result would be a replica of the original fittings, which would have no historical significance. So we do not understand the reasoning. In conclusion, the Parish Council fear that the bottom line is that if this application is refused, then 66 High Street will remain an eyesore for years to come.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for this particular speaker? There are no questions. Thank you ever so much. Our next speaker on this particular item is Miss Childs. Welcome, and you can start when you're ready.
Good evening. Good evening. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I spoke against the last proposal and I am very much going to repeat my previous comments, but I appreciate the opportunity to again share my concerns. My name is Donya Childs and I live in Croftholme Close. My house backs directly onto the site. Firstly, I want to say I have absolutely no objection to the sympathetic renovation of the old Newman Stores building or the bakehouse. What I do object to is the erection of 2 new build modern houses to the rear of the site. 3 main reasons why I object are: firstly, I do not believe these modern new build houses should be built in the garden of a Grade 2 listed building on the boundary of a conservation area. They in no way preserve the history of the site or the original buildings, and I believe the only purpose of these houses is for financial gain. I do understand the builder may need the funds from these properties to restore the old buildings back to their original state, as has been requested. However, to overdevelop the site with new build properties to preserve the original features of Newman Stores seems totally counterintuitive. My second issue is parking and a lack of any green space. There are 8 parking spaces on this site, however, each of the 3-bed houses are allocated 2 spots each. This leaves 4 parking spaces to service 5 one-bed flats and a 1-bed dwelling, so not even 1 space is available per property. And then the latest proposal also includes the addition of a shop. Parking for the accommodation is inevitably going to spill onto an already crowded high street, and there is absolutely no provision for the addition of a shop. It has also been previously noted that the size of this parking spaces and the one-way system used does not account for the size of some modern vehicles, which could leave the whole site difficult to navigate. The site has no green space for residents to use for barbecues, smoking, or just hanging out. I feel the addition of a bench on the side of the pavement does little to overcome this issue. Finally, and the issue that affects us most, is the proximity of these new build houses to the rear of my property is totally unacceptable. This new proposal has moved them 50 centimetres further away from our boundary, but this still leaves their back door a mere 15.2 metres from my back door. This is well below the acceptable distance of back-to-back houses of 21 metres. I appreciate they have replaced the upstairs windows with skylights, but this then just leaves a wall 7.5 metres from my fence looming over my property, and both of the back bedrooms in our house still looking directly into their living space and garden. It has been stated on the plans that some of the trees will remain, however, as per the report, this is unsustainable. In conclusion, I absolutely support the sympathetic renovation of the buildings already on the site. The space behind should then be used to provide adequate parking and green space to provide a happy and healthy living environment. The current plan overdevelops the site with little regard for its history, the surrounding residents' privacy, and the villagers' safe use of the high street. This is why I believe it should be rejected. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any questions of clarification for this particular speaker? There are no questions. Thank you very much. Could I invite Mr. Philip Harker as our next speaker? Thank you very much.
Is that on? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for allowing us to speak in support of the application. My name is Philip Harker, and I have the applicant, Mr. McCaffrey, with me, who is happy to answer any queries. The application, as described, is for conversion of 66 High Street into 5 flats and re-establishment of a shop restoration of the former bakehouse into a dwelling, and 2 new homes towards the rear of the land. This application presents a unique opportunity to enable protection and restoration of 2 listed buildings within the conservation area. It is not unreasonable to suggest that without the application moving forward, then the future of these 2 listed buildings, which have been left to seriously deteriorate over the last 30 years, will eventually be lost forever. The Planning Officer's report sets out the particulars of the application, confirming that the application meets principles of sustainable development, in our opinion, should be granted permission on balance of its planning merits. The Planning Officer's report does flag 2 aspects. Firstly, the need for a preliminary ecological appraisal, which has not previously been requested. Indeed, the previous case officer's report proposed a condition which would satisfy relevant planning policies. We'd welcome such a condition to give you confidence of our intention to deliver the appropriate ecological mitigation. We therefore do not consider that this should be a matter to prevent approval of the application. Secondly, there is debate within the report regarding potential adverse impact of the setting of the listed buildings. We believe that some of the opinions discussed stem from confusion within the reports, as in parts they state that the bakehouse is to be demolished. However, the application is very clear that the bakehouse will be restored and brought back into beneficial use. As the case officer reports, the proposed 2 new homes will not be seen from the street and are outside the conservation area, and therefore, in our opinion, will not have a detrimental impact to the conservation area or setting of the listed buildings. Instead, this application will both restore and conserve these 2 listed buildings, which could otherwise continue to degrade and be lost. Regarding the siting of the 2 new homes, these are over 14 metres away from the back of the existing dwellings and designed to ensure no loss of privacy, and your officer confirms that this meets planning policy. The application also reduced the number of proposed flats and bedrooms to reduce parking demand and has increased the number of parking spaces to be provided. This is in response to local concerns, even though there is no minimum parking requirements of the local plan. The application has also increased the number of additional trees and enhanced landscaping to ensure buffer. In summary, this application proposes a sympathetic conservation and restoration of 66 High Street and the former bakehouse, respectively, along with construction of 2 new dwellings. The Planning Officer's report clearly states that there are no planning issues other than heritage, and we consider that this application will not have a detrimental impact on the conservation area or the setting of the listed buildings. The application is wholeheartedly supported by the Parish Council, who represent the local community and recognise that this application will safeguard these listed buildings for future generations, as without it there could be a real risk that these will be lost forever. We would ask that the Planning Committee consider the overall benefits and planning merits of this application in conserving the past and enabling future sustainable residential development and economic needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the applicant? Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you. The officer's report before us mentions a structural engineer's report from 2020, and the officer's conclusion that that report recommends taking down of the entire structure and reconstruction. How would you respond to that?
Good evening. Yes, sorry, it does state that it would be recommended to take it down, and that's purely for a cost viability. There is no reason that this property cannot be, or this building cannot be renovated sympathetically and kept for the greater good, really. There's no reason to knock it down.
So the application is to restore...
To restore it, but there's a lot of inconsistencies within the report that says it will be detrimental to knock it down.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Sorry, they're all from me. Also in the officer report before us, there's a discussion about formal evidence provided to justify this level of development that would make the scheme viable, and that has not been provided. Has that at this point been provided to the officer?
No, it has not, as an enabling development, because we are led to believe that we comply with all planning regulations, all policies, and it's purely on a heritage aspect of detrimental to the listing, to the setting of. There's no reason, and we've been told this by professionals, we don't need to justify enabling development.
Thank you. Councillor McAdam.
I just wonder what your attitude is towards
the biodiversity issue with the fact that the old bakehouse might be harbouring bats or protected species. Let's suppose that you did have a survey and it was found that there were protected species in there. What would your attitude be to that?
Yeah, certainly. If a ecological survey identified that there was bats present, then we'd put in appropriate mitigation measures to for that, including potentially a bat roost box. So if there is a requirement to mitigate, we'll put the requirement of that mitigation in place. And we're happy for a condition to be on that.
Councillor Dew.
Good evening. Yeah, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. I've been on this council a long while. And, you know, the whole time I've been there, this site has been degraded. I know you guys haven't owned it or been involved in that time, so I appreciate the fact that you're trying to come up with a programme that can come forward. I appreciate what you're doing regarding the two listed buildings, although I still sometimes look at some of the listed buildings that we have and wonder a bit, but that's a different question altogether. We've got what we've got. My question really is, you need to build the 2 units at the back, as far as I can see, to enable the funding to come forward to do the rest, because at the end of the day, you're not a charity as far as I've checked, so it's got to be paid for in some way. I mean, the officers are leaning towards the fact that what's been provided isn't really acceptable. I'm open-minded on that, I have to say. But from your point of view, do you think there are any other alternatives that could be, I'm not suggesting we redesign it because we're not allowed to do that, but have you considered other options that you could have done and concluded this is the way forward? And I'll leave it there, thank you.
Yes, sorry, we've considered pretty much everything, I think. So has every person that's looked at this property for the last 30 years while it's been decaying. Our first pre-application was not inclusive of any properties in the back. We were basically told in pre-application that parking to the rear would not be acceptable. We had to restore the and refit the shop units, which are beyond salvageable, and we had to restore the bakehouse. With the additional costs of that, the only way we could make this viable is to put the two new homes in the back garden. So yes, we have looked at every angle. Sorry, could I just note as well that as obviously we would look at this and think actually it would make a lovely house, for somebody. The cost of the works involved to restore that premises, the fact that it's on a main street, it's adjoined to a block of flats, it looks out onto a car park at the rear and onto a new housing estate built in the curtilage of the neighbouring property, listed property, just totally unviable. It's not really suited.
There are no other questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you. If any do pop up, I'm more than happy to answer.
Thank you. We will move on to our debate. We have, we can come back to our officers for any points of clarification. We also have our conservation officer here to answer any questions as well. Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondered if you could just summarise the reasons for refusal in this. I didn't quite get that in your presentation. I know they're contained in the report. Interesting to hear them verbally.
Reasons for refusal. Impact upon the adverse impact on the setting of the listed buildings and the character appearance of the conservation area, and the lack of a preliminary ecological assessment concerning the presence of bats or other protected species on the site.
Could you clarify what the law is about consent for the bats? Are we allowed to do it as a condition, or?
There are 17 species of bats in this country, all protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981 and various other bits of English and European legislation. We are not able to condition surveys on planning permissions, on planning applications, because the legislation, that's what the legislation states. I can't quote the legislation, but that's the gist of it.
Thank you. Councillor.
Chair, would it help as I went to the trouble to look at some case law on this? So unusually, we normally say that where matters are separate, subject to a separate licensing regime, it's not within the council's gift to make determinations on that. But this is a sort of exception. So bats are protected under as a European protected species, along with great crested newts, the kind of headlines that throw up about various planning applications being scuppered by them. There are 3 tests that have to be applied as part of the licensing regime for this. And the case law says that a planning authority must also make a determination of those same 3 tests. Otherwise, if planning permission was issued, it would be unimplementable because it would be illegal because it won't be licensed. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So this case from 2009, which was a judicial review case, so it was R on the application of Simon Woolley versus Cheshire East Borough Council. And the judgment actually said, the court said that an LPA cannot discharge its duty simply by adding a condition to the grant of planning permission, which requires a licence from Natural England to be obtained. Such a condition would not amount to engaging with the directive. So there's a conflict there, and there is a clear, if someone was minded to bring a judicial review action, if we put a condition on, it would be successful, in my view.
Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, really. The first one is around the issue of bats or not, because at the moment, because there's not been an ecological survey done and someone's thrown bats up in the air, we don't even know whether they're there or not. So I was thinking, I'd look for your advice that I think we're on sound ground of saying whether or not we think this is a great project going forward or not. We've got to have that report before we can take things forward. And the second one is for Ms. Brown. Sorry about that, Louise. Really just following on from the question that I asked the applicants about whether there's any alternatives that could be found to work on that. I'm not asking you to redesign it either, but obviously you've got a lot of experience and strong objections to this, and I'm just wondering whether or not there would be something that could come forward that would be acceptable. I'm not asking you to say what it is, just really comment on the general premise of whether we're actually pushing for something that can never be delivered, or actually the right thing might be deliverable. That's those 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dew. In terms of uses for the building, there are a wide variety of uses. We have only been presented with the one use, which is the change of use of the building to provide flats, the conversion of the bakehouse into a separate unit and housing at the back. The NPPF talks about what's called the optimum viable use. So that recognises there are a number of uses that a historic building could be put to, but the optimum viable use is the use that you can employ to the building which will have the least amount of harm. So there's a wide range. We've only had to deal with one set, which forms part of this application.
Just a supplementary on the back of that. So are we saying that, in your opinion, and as I say, you're very experienced and I respect your opinion on these things, in your opinion, building something of a modern design at the back, we couldn't make that work?
I don't understand. Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, I think the biggest objection in my mind, and some of the things, is the 2 new buildings, the 2 new bits at the back, ignoring the other uses that may be there, seem to be regardless of the fact they're not in the conservation area, 6 foot outside is enough to influence what happens and actually matter to it. So I'm just saying, in your opinion, building something like that down there simply wouldn't work. We're saying part of the reason for the objection on this, as far as I can see, is the fact that those are there in a modern construction and they affect the view through the site. We have to consider those things. So I'm just asking, really, whether in your opinion there is something down there that could be made to work to perhaps create funding for, or whether it's actually something that could simply never happen. So I'll ask that and then leave it.
There's a number of points here. From my professional assessment of the application, we have a statutory duty to preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area and have special regard to the desirability of preserving what is special about the listed building. And the setting of the listed building contributes to what's special about it. It gives you that character of a historic shop, and the shopkeeper would live over the shop and he would have the garden as part of that. And there were outbuildings that formed part of that listed building. So the bakehouse was historically, you used to have your kitchen separate to your house because it was a fire hazard effectively. So it explains a little bit about the history of the site. In terms of the financial side of the application, the applicant has said he hasn't provided any financial justification for the development, and therefore that is not something we've been able to consider as part of the application.
Councillor Niche.
Louise is looking worried. You've already answered the first question, which I was going to get. You know, it was basically because obviously some of us have been here before, and a bit of deja vu was actually the reasoning why it's listed, which is one question. But the second question back to the case officer is I wonder if you could repeat again for those that were here before. So, what are the main differences? I think you're quite eloquent at it in the first place between what we had before. When DMC refused the application and what we've got now. So it's actually understanding in some ways what differences would they be between the two. And I think it's relevant because we've already refused it once. And I think it's worth us understanding the difference now between the previous application and this one.
This application differs from the previous one in that the semi-detached dwellings are moved forward by 500 millimetres. The number of bike stalls and bike stands on the site have been reduced and resited around the site. There is additional planting proposed. The rear fence has been increased in height by 500 millimetres, and the boundary to the bakehouse has been squared off.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you, Chair. With apologies for jumping around slightly, I wondered if we might return to Councillor Dew's questions and the responses, just to check with the Conservation Officer that I've understood the relevant section in the report. What is it, 5.4, and then 7.21 makes explicit reference to the need to consider ability to secure optimal viable use, which the Conservation Officer referenced in her remarks. Am I right in understanding essentially that despite the invitation from my colleague to speculate on the sort of detailed attributes potentially of a viable use, is the point here that because there is not a viability assessment submitted, we're simply not capable of reaching a decision about what level of development constitutes optimum viable use, and therefore the kind of questions of detail and costings that were speculated about earlier are not relevant in the absence of that evidence for us to base our judgment on. Is that broadly speaking correct?
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. Yes, in summary, essentially, as the case officer has identified, the site is in the built-up area of Warboys, and we acknowledge that. However, it is within the setting of a listed building, which brings in that legislation for us to consider. With that in mind, it's then considering the design and the relationship of the proposal within that setting. But in this context, for the reasons set out in the report, there are concerns regarding that, and to try and overcome that, we have not been presented with an enabling argument to demonstrate that in order to bring the building itself back into a viable use, and therefore enabling development needs to fund that, we don't have that as a consideration before us.
Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Just turning back to ecology, I'm wondering if the officers have any response to the late representation about a preliminary ecological appraisal never having been asked for, and that previously this had been suggested as a condition. Is the difference here simply because the case law has changed between the two applications, or is there something else we should know?
I think in the spirit of transparency, different officers have looked at it in this now, and we've considered the application in front of us and made our recommendation based not only on policy but on case law as it is before us. So regardless of the previous recommendation, it would be unreasonable of us to not consider the law in its current context as we make a recommendation.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if this is one for you, Louise. 7.35, page 81, says that basically the harm is categorised as less than substantial under the terms of the NPPF, as the exterior of the building will not be harmed. And then later it says, if I've got it correctly, 7.39, so paragraph 202 of the NPPF states, where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits. And of course, he uses the optimum viable use there, but it almost seems to be an endorsement of the application by saying the harm is less than substantial. You're sort of indicating that actually there are benefits to this.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's it is a common misunderstanding. It's the terminology we are required to use in the NPPF. So the Act specifically says you should have special regard to the desirability of preserving and enhancing the character and appearance of the conservation area, so avoiding all harm, and pay special regard to the desirability of preserving the listed building, again, to avoid harm. If harm is assessed in any form, whether it formed harm to the setting or to the significance of the listed building itself, then that has to be put into one of two categories. Substantial harm, which is almost a direct reason for refusal, or less than substantial harm. Now, case law is telling us that for there to be substantial harm, it is basically the erasing of anything that was important about that listed building or that conservation area. It happens extremely rarely, and it's usually where there is total demolition of a building. So if you imagine a staircase, substantial harm is right at the top, but all those other 9 or 12 steps that lead up to it are some degree of less than substantial. It just falls below the threshold of what is substantial. It doesn't mean it is a less than substantial reason for refusal. Does that make sense?
Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just, there'll probably be some groans in a moment when I say what I'm going to say, but we obviously have issue at the moment with ecology, which is a shame. I think this should have come through with the application in the first place, but I completely wasn't asked for, and there we go. We are where we are. There's also there's the potential of the financial viability, sort of changing the aspect of this a little bit as well. So therefore, I mean, is there any mileage at all in deferring this to give the applicant the opportunity to source these two documents? There's a distinct from the right word, but the parish council. This has been going around. This has come to DMC several times. Parish council, they're in support of this. There's, rather than sort of go around the circle again, is there any chance of I don't know what the appetite is from my colleagues as well, but I'll put that out there that we defer this to give the applicant the chance to get these two documents put together.
Thank you. In theory, we shouldn't really be deferring items unless there are absolutely extenuating circumstances, and we should be making a decision based on the application in front of us tonight. With that in mind, and just to summarise some of the conversation tonight, just to be clear, the application before you does not, while it talks about the listed building insofar as the change of use in principle, we're not here to discuss the fixtures and fittings of the listed building. The reason for refusal was clear last time, and tonight we heard that there is no financial viability associated with this. In addition, we heard tonight that the bakehouse, albeit the structural report makes reference to the building needing to be taken down and rebuilt, notwithstanding the discussion on ecology, Clearly, the applicant has suggested that may not need to be the case. We don't have a structural report in front of us that confirms that. However, it is absolutely within the applicant's gift to either, if the panel is minded to refuse the application, it is within the applicant's gift to appeal that decision to the Planning Inspectorate, or alternatively, they are absolutely welcome to submit a revised application with all the necessary information, which will be considered on its own merits.
Thank you. Are there any more questions of clarification? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. So, to make it acceptable to yourselves, a viability report's needed, ecological appraisal, acceptance of the wheeled bin, bat survey. Could these not be so that we can go on and make a decision tonight? Because could they be conditioned? If we was minded to approve this, could we then add these conditions in? And obviously, if the conditions are not met, the application fails.
Thank you. I refer to the commentary earlier from my colleague Mr. Pitt, our lawyer, with reference to the ability to condition bats, namely that would be found unsound by the courts if we were to consider that and we were subject to challenge. Furthermore, just to reiterate that we're suggesting that the additional information is required. What we're not saying is that additional information isn't itself acceptable. It would have to be assessed. So just as a matter of clarification, the detail required, to my mind, goes to the heart of what we're trying to consider here, and for that reason we should be considering it as part of the application and not relying on conditions.
Are there any further questions of clarification? In that case, we'll move on to the debate. Who would like to start off on the debate? Councillor Wakeford, thank you.
Shall I try? So I think we can all sympathise enormously with the parish council's position in this, and I'm particularly sympathetic to the need for more housing across our district, and this presents an opportunity of adding housing provision. But I think it's crystal clear from the clarification provided to us by officers on top of what's in the report that there seems to be no way we could do other than to refuse the application before us this evening. I think the point around the viability assessment, as clarified in response to Councillor Butler, is that it's not merely provision of a sort of binary document. That it's not a binary assessment, sort of tick that we've got that and we carry on with the proposals put to us. Clearly, they would need to relate and support the particular level of development that was proposed, I think, as was put, these documents do strike me as core to the application tonight. So I think surely we have to refuse this, but in the questions we've asked and the observations the applicants will have heard, I hope that refusal can be taken as an encouragement to come back with a proposal that does meet the requirements in future, to be considered in all the normal ways on which I don't wish to make reference to any prejudgment this evening. But thank you for looking to bring this into use, but I don't see we can support it. So I don't wish to prevent colleagues contributing, so I won't formally propose as the first speaker, but happy to in due course, if that's helpful to you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. No, I tend to agree with the general comments there. we haven't got the information to make an affirmative decision tonight, and I think that's the thing. I'm not saying if we had the information that we would be in a position to either, because the viability surveys and the other things we've asked for might actually make it very clear that this won't work. But I think, unfortunately, what we've got before us tonight, there's too much gap in it to actually go with it. And as much as it hurts my better feeling on this, because the whole time I've been on this council, this site's been a wreck, and we've got to find a way of bringing this forward one way or another. And I think everyone's got their best, the best interests of the site and the area in mind. I mean, we've all got different ways of getting there. The parish council, ourselves, our conservation team, the owners themselves, and who are looking far more proactively to work with us than the previous owners. So we've got to look at it as a step in the right direction. This isn't a question of the same thing is rumbling through time after time. This is much better than we've had before. But I feel we've got an owner there who will try and find a way forward. But I think, despite the fact that we're arguing about the semantics of whether or not there should have been a report for this, that or the other in the past, as Ms Kerr has said, whether or not it is on this application is what is required, and it will make it stack up. I think also, following on from what Mr Pitt said, we can't go, as much as I'd like to, get it through and add conditions on. If they're going to fall over at the first attempt, that's no use to anyone whatsoever. So I think reluctantly, I've got to support Councillor Wakefield on this. As much as I'd like to see something come forward that I can support and take through tonight, we're not there with the information we've got in front of us. So, if you're not going to propose refusal, I will on that basis, if you'll accept it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dew. Councillor Niche.
Thank you, Chair. We've looked at this a number of times, and we do know full well that for war boys, something needs to be done for it. I mean, they've had to suffer what's been there, as we've heard, for a number of years. And as I drive by, I always look at it and sort of try and hide, thinking, hopefully something will come through. And I think it is down to the fact that we've got to be mindful. Just because it's in a poor state or doesn't look particularly nice, that's not a reason for passing it, because otherwise that'd be the easy way to get things passed, isn't it? Just let it go derelict. I think there are some bits missing from it, and to me the viability is an important one as well. As to it's what can be done to ensure that it could be put back into a reasonable state, but also viable for the person to do that, so that we actually do get this property back in use. And for that reason, I agree with the other comments that have gone from Councillor Wakeford and Councillor Dew, in that I would say that we should refuse it on that. But knowing full well, it seems like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, if you want to use that word, or the lights haven't gone out completely on the building yet. I think it can be utilised, and actually I think there is a way forward. It's just not quite there yet, with those bits of the jigsaw missing. So I'm not sure we've had a proposer and a seconder, but if we haven't on second, if Councillor Wakeford wants to second, happy with that.
Councillor Wakeford, are you? Councillor Butler.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, yeah, I'm struggling with this one altogether. Looking at the planning applications that we've passed, when you look at page 83, is it, when all those 2 to 8 and 10 to 14, we've given all those permission. And it's in a very close proximity to the area we're talking about. It is within our gift to defer this and give the applicant time to submit the relevant studies and appraisals that we need. As we've heard, they've never been asked for an ecological appraisal. So I do feel a bit that way, that we ought to give them a chance to probably submit the viability report and everything else, rather than just turn it down. And then it's going to cost a lot of time again, I mean, I think the feeling of the room that I get is that we would probably like to see something happen on this site, and if we just turn it flat, that's probably the end of it. The applicant will think, I've done all I can. This is the only way it will work. So I'm in favour of deferral rather than refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Sanderson?
If that's a proposal from Councillor Butler, I will happily second it. Thank you.
I mean, can I ask for some legal advice on that, please, Chairman, just to make sure that a deferral is legally correct and can be, the various appraisals can be submitted?
We'll just get some advice from legal. Thank you. Oh, from Clara, sorry.
Thank you. It's really just a reminder on how we use deferrals, and we should be using them sparingly. Ultimately, the applicant is entitled to a decision to be made, and there must be, the bar is quite high for us to be able to advise as to why we would defer. In addition, I would also raise the level of uncertainty that it's providing to the applicant to defer effectively. If a decision is made tonight, then the applicant also has options tomorrow, which, if you're minded to approve, that's one we'll explore, or if it's a refusal, the applicant can appeal to the Planning Inspectorate. I should say that the conversation tonight does not preclude, or does it have any impact on any future application or consideration of that application, if the applicant was minded to come back with all the additional information. I put this in the context too of the potential level of uncertainty over time and decision making, depending on the level of evidence, when it comes in, how it needs to be assessed. So with that in mind, again, I urge caution in and would suggest that deferral needs to be used in an exceptional circumstance.
Councillor Wakeford?
If I may, coming in again, just to share, I find Clara's advice on this compelling as to the appropriate use of deferrals, and I think were there one single factor of which sort of provision of a tick box wasn't, was what was missing, then I think it'd be one thing. But as we've discussed, it's more than one thing with this application. So I'd stand by the original proposal, whoever formally made or seconded it in our records, which I think you were going to move us to.
Yes, indeed. Councillor Dew, are you happy to make a proposal? And that proposal is to refuse. And Councillor Niche, are you happy to second that? Or Councillor Wakeford?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. We will now take a vote. All those that are for refusal of this application.
With the greatest respect, Chairman, we had actually made our proposal, and then you were distracted from taking Councillor Wakeford's proposal. So I've suggested at that time it indicated, but you were elsewhere. So it may not have been formally made, but Councillor Niche had suggested, and he had indicated, and then you went to another speaker. So and then didn't go back to him. So otherwise, we're going to be slightly out of order here. I accept your discretion on it. But
No,
I'm not
that's fine. I had it written down that I had a proposal from Councillor Dew and a seconder. So we will go with that proposal first.
So the discussion that we were just having was that I had written down Councillor Dew proposed first, Councillor Niche seconded it first to refuse, and so that vote should be taken first. So that was the discussion that we had.
Okay. Okay, so we will.
Yeah, I mean, just for the benefit of the public sort of technical nature of this. I think Councillor Sanderson's asking why the kind of contrary, the vote on deferral doesn't come first, and it's because at this council, at least, it's a decision is proposed by a member, seconded. At some councils, the report speaks for itself, and members automatically vote on the recommendation first. So if it fails, it fails. If it doesn't, it can be appealed, etc. But at this council, actually, it's verbally kind of articulated how members wish to. Often, the member who wants to refuse it gets seconded, in which case that would be taken first. So it's not an amendment. There's not an amendment. It's a recommendation, but obviously members aren't bound to vote on that recommendation in the first place. Someone can propose a contrary. Well, I mean, I don't think it would be. I think it would be the opposite. Actually, I think procedurally it's the correct thing to do. So I wouldn't fear a judicial review on something that I've recommended.
Okay, so we will take a vote on the proposal to refuse the application. All those for approval of refusing the application.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those that are against.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any abstentions?
1. So that is approved and the application is refused.
Thank you. We will now move on to item 5, which is appeals decision, and we will consider a report from the Planning Services Manager.
Thank you, members. You have a list of appeal decisions from the last month. Pleased to see that you'll note that the appeal outcome was in line with the original recommendation. If I could just draw your attention to, in particular, the appeal, the LBC appeal at Bythorn and Keyston. I believe it's relevant to highlight that to the panel as we go forward. You'll notice it relates to solar panels. Clearly, we're seeing an upturn in people addressing the cost of living crisis, and within that, obviously considering the use of solar panels. This is actually quite a helpful decision in considering how, and in looking at how we consider solar panels on listed buildings. And clearly, I would actually encourage you to have a look at that. And if you haven't got that appeal and you would like to have a look at it, please do send me an email outside of this meeting and we'll happily share it. But I think it helpfully demonstrates how we consider listed buildings and weighing that public interest argument, particularly in the current climate around cost of living. So it's an appeal I would encourage members to look at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that is the end of our agenda. Thank you all for your attendance and contributions to the meeting. With that, I declare the meeting closed.